Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we're going to meet up with Glen Dahlgren from California by Skype with The Child of Chaos and The Game of War. Thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay, these books were crazy good. And kept me up really late.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But, okay, so The Child of Chaos is really the first book, right?
It was the first one I wrote, but chronologically, it's the second.
Right. So The Game of War, I wish I would have read this first. People should read The Game of War first so they understand the main character. All right, so let's start with...
I've heard the opposite, actually. Some people prefer to read The Child of Chaos because it sets up the world a little bit more than Game of War. Game of War is kind of more important once you understand who Dantes is from Child of Chaos. And Dantes is a priest of war who everybody wanted to know more about after reading Child of Chaos, so I had to write that first book.
Right. Well, I think 200 pages in, I was probably in that frame of mind. But at the beginning, I was like, oh, I wish I read this first. Because then it made me understand him better. And, you know, just because of his appearance in The Child of Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you come up with The Child of Chaos?
So, as you know, I'm a computer game designer. And about a little over 20 years ago, I was trying to sell The Wheel of Time to a publisher, and working with my company, Legend Entertainment. And I went to Activision, and they loved the idea of the game, but they didn't like the idea of the license, which was The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. So the night before I had to pitch, they told me, come up with a different premise. And I was like, I have a night to come up with something different. I don't know if I can do that. But I did. And I pitched, and it went really well. We ended up not going with Activision. We ended up going with a company called GT, who did like the license, who wanted to release Wheel of Time. And actually, here's the game, Wheel of Time. And then once I was done with that game, I came back to the premise that I came up with that night before. And I said, is there another game I can work with here? I can make here. And I realized it was not a game. It was a story. And it was actually a novel. And it took me 20 years from then to finish that book.
20 years?
It took me 20 years. Now, I was working full-time and, just working on it here and there. I wasn't working on it every day for 20 years. But it took me that long to take it seriously and actually get it done, get it edited, and get it into book form and on shelves.
But don't video games have, a lot of video games, don't they have a storyline that you keep, moving up towards and gaining access to?
So some do. And actually, people take stories in games a lot more seriously now than they used to. Back when I first started, story took a back seat in most video games. However, the company that I was with, Legend Entertainment, we were all about adventure games. And adventure games are all about story. It's all about solving puzzles and furthering the plot, because that is sort of how you measure progression until you get to the end and finish the story. So I had a lot of experience doing stories, creating stories inside of these world-famous authors' works, like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time and Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman's Deathgate Cycle, Frederik Pohl's Gateway, Piers Anthony's Xanth. We went after a lot of big-name authors to get licenses for their stuff. So I had all this experience working in these worlds, and I really wanted to create a world of my own. And that's what I did with Child of Chaos.
Wow. Do you have boys or girls for your children?
I have one girl and one boy.
One girl and one boy? Okay, that makes sense. Do they add to the chaos?
Oh yeah, they are a great audience for me, given that it's young adult. Although now that you've read the books, Child Chaos sort of ended up being young adult, but it's pretty dark in places. I would definitely say, towards the adult part of the young adult for that range. Game of War, I think, is firmly in that camp. It's got a fair amount of violence, but it's all justified and it all makes sense, and there's not as much darkness in it. There's a little.
There is a little. But you did get the Reader's Favorite Book Award for The Child of Chaos. It was a great read. I couldn't put it down. And I was up late reading both of them. And it just reminds you of when you're young and people are, really going off the deep end, making the wrong choices. And I love the whole chase, what they were working towards.
I actually really like that about Dantes, is his character. You never think like he's doing the wrong thing. His motivations are always pure, and he's always trying to do his best. But you realize after the fact how wrong things have gotten. But you still keep pulling for him. You still want him to succeed, and he's capable of doing it.
Right, but it's bouncing back from the mistakes. I like the whole, learning to ask more questions and look at things in a broader view, like the whole religion and slavery issues that come up. That was exceptionally well done.
Well, I appreciate that. And we explore more of that in the next book, which is the House of Chaos, which is book 2 in the series.
The House of Chaos?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds great. The price, the price of a restricted environment, that came out really good. And the communities that you live in and the environments that you're in or that you choose to be in, I thought that played out really well throughout.
One of the things that really attracted to me to this idea, to this world, was that a lot of people love exploring the idea of good versus evil. And I mean, obviously that's very valuable and that's, important. But I like the idea of a society where good and evil were effectively the same thing. They are both just something, and in fact, the first tagline that I had for the book was, it doesn't matter if you're good or evil, just be something. And so as long as you are pulled in a direction to one of the aspects of order, then you're part of this ruling class of priests. And as long as you're not faithless, because faithless get the short end of the stick of everything. So I really liked exploring that and the idea of, and you also, people think, well, chaos is bad and order is good. And that's true in a lot of different senses, but it's not always true. Because without chaos, you don't get creativity. You don't get, some randomness. You don't get progression. And that's something I really had a lot of fun exploring.
The progression was really good. The evil was really well done. It was really, so I could see where that may not be YA. I just remember that. I tried to put it out of my mind. Because it was nightmarish. But it was really well done. I was really scared. I was like,
Well, it's like, I had to portray evil. There was one chapter I really didn't want to write. And that was Horace's first chapter. Horace, who's the villain of The Child of Chaos. And exploring his psyche and sort of what drives him, that made me very uncomfortable. And even going further, it still made me uncomfortable. And I knew I was on the right track because it was making me uncomfortable.
Right. And it made you uncomfortable when you thought of people that you might know like that?
I don't know anyone like that. Thank God.
Well, not with everything going on with Horace, but there are parts of Horace that you do find in people that you meet along the way. And you're like, ooh.
Yeah, people are motivated by self-interest and, they don't care so much about how it affects other people. And Horace is definitely like that.
Yeah, he was really easy to dislike.
I've heard that. I've heard that a lot. And actually the first draft didn't go as much into who he was as to what he did. And I realized I really needed to understand who he was and why he was doing those things. And that's why we get the scene at the end in the dreaming where we discover what pushed him to be that person.
Yeah, that was sad, but I still didn't like them.
You're not supposed to like them, so that's totally fine.
I love that whole balance and tipping of the scales to justice too, like just a tweak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that whole freedom to choose a religion.
Well, honestly, you have no freedom.
Right.
Excuse me?
Or not.
Yeah, you cannot choose. And that's kind of the point. If you're not that the temples make it seem like you might have some choice in it because you can test it in any temple that you want. But the truth is the longing chooses who the longing chooses. And if you don't have a longing, then you're just not going to get in to your temple. They're more than willing to take your gold and let you try, though, as we see with plays.
Well, as an award-winning game designer, how did that help you to just create this story? And how long did the second one take you to write?
Second one took me about 9 months. And I'm definitely not an author that can produce a story like in a month. You know, I know that they're out there and they're making, good money producing basically serial novels. I just can't do that. I have to let a book gestate. Maybe not 20 years, but I need to fully understand the book and the ideas and the themes that I'm trying to explore before I can get it down. And I think Brandon Sanderson said it pretty well when he said, like, you have to have at least 2 or 3 strong ideas to make a novel. And then a year for a novel is not uncommon, if you're really going to put in the work. And so that's what I'm targeting. Basically, I'm trying to release a novel about the same time every year. And as for making games, like I said, everything that I've ever done, even when I was in high school, when I was making D&D modules for tournaments in school, everything was story-based. I was always about creating content that had really strong stories. And that just translated really well into the kind of computer games I was making, even like the first-person shooters and games that were puzzle games. Star Trek Online was another fantastic game to work on because I got to make fiction inside of this wonderful universe, the Star Trek universe. And so I find that that's what really inspires me, is being able to focus on the story, focus on the characters, focus on the motivations, even if that character is the player. I just have to figure out who I can tell that player he is and have them empathize with that character.
Well, book 3 just came out, right?
No, I'm working on book 3.
You're working on it? When will that be released?
Well, I'm hoping for, again, the same schedule. I'm hoping for around August, September of 2022.
Okay. And how many books will be in the series?
I'm not sure yet. I know it's going to be at least a trilogy, but I really like this world. Even though I kind of blow it up at the end of book 1, there's still a lot of potential there to explore. So we'll see. And I kind of blow things up again at the end of book 2 in a very different way, but it kind of opens up a lot of options.
I just like the way the whole religious aspects played out. Like you're either going to be in it or you're not. And then you could just end up being a faithless or have to wait and just, try another one. And if you try evil, that would have really bad repercussions anyway. So
yes, if you try and you fail in evil, then that's not good for you.
Yeah. Well, none of them were really good. Those guys really got the short end of the stick. I was hoping they'd all group together and rile against everything.
Yeah. I mean, if you try and fail at any religion, it's going to cost you, whether it costs you gold or costs you something else. That's kind of depending on your financial situation. So you better kind of, it's best to feel the longing before going into a testing. Then you might have a chance.
Maybe. I don't know.
Depends on if you really are feeling the longing, if you're tricking yourself.
Right. Well, if you're a good actor. And speaking of acting, so you've acted and done voice direct for some of the video games. Will you be doing audiobooks for these?
They are out, and they've been getting great reviews. People seem to like my performances, which is great because I'm kind of a ham. And I always feel that authors, no one understands the material better than the author, better than the person who wrote it. So I'm really able to get into the heads of the characters, and I think I do decent voices for all my characters. At least I try to make sure that they're all different, so that if you're hearing a conversation, you know who's talking. And people seem to think that I did a pretty good job.
Well, how long was the audiobook for Child of Chaos? For about 343 pages.
They both run about 13 hours.
13 hours?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. But how long does it take to tape that?
Oh my God, months.
Months?
At least 2 months. Game of War took me less time, because I had to learn everything on Child of Chaos. So taping it is the way I work. I never use the first take of anything. I always take it and then I do the line again now that I've heard it and I know how to say it. So editing is like 90% of the time.
Yeah, editing on audio is tough.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work. It's just I get my hands get numb because I'm working on the mouse for so long, doing the same repetitive motions over and over again.
How did you find it different than the gaming ones that you did in the past?
Well, I was never the editor. So what I was doing is I've done voice acting in some of them, but the only lead role I took was in Deathgate. I was the evil dragon. And the only reason I did that is because I could modify my voice, because I was kind of I don't know, nervous about putting my voice out there. I wasn't sure that, because I was working with union paid actors. These people had done some incredible work on stage and in TV and movies. And so putting myself in that class, I didn't feel comfortable. But when I came to do this, I figured if I don't do it myself, I'm going to kick myself because it's so much fun. And I really think I could do a good job. And actually what I did was I put up an audition on ACX. I took the top 3 narrators, the ones that I liked the most, and then I did my own. And I sent all of them to people that I really trusted who'd never heard me speak before. And they chose me almost, I think, like 9 out of 10 times. They chose me as the one they liked the most. So I said, okay, I have to do it now. But for games, it was mostly me directing other people and then choosing the right takes. So I didn't actually have to get in and cut and do all the noise reduction and all that stuff. I was not an audio engineer. I would say I'm still not an audio engineer, but I understand enough now to at least produce an audiobook.
Oh, that's great. It seems tedious. All right, back on the books. A couple of other things were, just being able to think for yourself instead of just blindly following any of those groups that were involved and dealing with other people's madness. That was so sweet. How did you come up with that? I mean, you must have some really crazy friends. Who do you base this off of?
Well, it's not, I don't have any crazy, people who are crazy like that. So I assume that you're referring to following a group. Seems to me it's both books, more Child of Chaos, and then dealing with craziness would be Game of War. Is that what you're referring to?
It is.
Yeah. Honestly, when I start writing a book, I'm not entirely sure that I understand exactly what the core of the book is going to be. I think it's going to be one thing. And then as I started writing Game of War, I had to ask myself, what does the token do? And so for everyone, obviously people who haven't read these books, anyone who has a longing is pulled to the gift of a temple. They cannot not follow that longing. They have to go to the gift. And that's sort of the crux of a lot of story issues in both books. But they have a token. Any artifact that's blessed by that god can tamp down the longing, allow them to control it. And so they all have this token. The priests of war have a token that allows them. Once I had to ask myself, what does it do? Because all of these tokens do something. And I realized, well, probably it makes them fight better, because that's what a token would do for a priest of war. But then I thought, how does it make it fight better? And I realized that it actually allows them to see the experiences of other priests, all the other priests that have ever been in the temple. And and then I thought, well, what are the implications of that? What if there's weird, crazy priests somewhere in there? And actually, I needed to set up a fight where he didn't have access to his powers in order to raise the stakes. And that's when I realized what was going on there, that he was tapping into something. So it was that far into the book that I realized really what was going on. And then I had to go back and rewrite a bunch of stuff once I understood what the token was. And it became the core of the book. I mean, his whole relationship with his father, his relationship with his grandfather, who was a legendary priest of war, and then had some issues.
Right.
That became the driver of the entire story.
Yeah, I thought you did really well with, just helping people to see and understand bigotry and keeping yourself in check. Like just that whole moral compass, but it's so well woven into the story. So I think it really comes out so we understand the characters in the game of war, but you can see it hinting through the child of chaos. It's really
they're
wonderful writing.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. They're two very different perspectives, and I wanted to show this world from those two perspectives. And one, you have someone who's clearly not a priest. He's like the furthest away you can get from a priest because he's drawn to chaos. And then you have someone who's a priest, but who has, a real understanding of what it is, the perspective of the faithless, and he wants to champion the faithless. And I'll tell you, those two perspectives, they even end up in very different places. I mean, like Galen would not have done what Dantes did at the end of that book. And then in book 2, in the House of Chaos, the one I'm writing now, you see the culmination of that conflict of Galen and Dantes, because they don't see eye to eye on certain things.
Yeah, they definitely don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, not just certain things. But what about some of the things that happen to your body going through these different things, or the fight scenes? How did you create that? Do you have a lot of experience with fighting?
I don't. I actually was really worried about having to write combat scenes because I'd never done it before. And I knew that Game of War was going to have a fair number of combat scenes. And I think I read somewhere where every fight scene, every combat scene has to be answering a question. It can't just be about physical activity. It's got to be what's going on here that we're learning. Why is the fight happening, and what's the outcome going to be? And the actual physical motions, I wrote everything that I thought might be interesting. And there was usually a moment where things sort of come together, and that's what enables the person to succeed. So it's never just I hit you, you hit me, and we just keep doing that until someone drops. That's just not interesting.
No,
but I had no experience with it. I almost thought I was going to run it by like a martial artist to see if he had any opinion about it. But I think it ended up working pretty well. I got some good feedback about it, so I think I did a pretty good job.
No, you did a great job. I thought it was really good, because a lot of times when you're reading a fight scene, you're like, "Whoa, would the body really react that way?" And,
right.
And just the way that you have a great way of just explaining these actions, like it would happen in a video game. You're really getting good at games. Maybe that's where you got it from. But I just like the way everything flowed together. It was just such a great read. I finished both in less than a week. So
wow.
Yeah, it
I'm
was.
impressed.
It was just like, and that's like a 5-day week. I don't count the weekends. But I was up till like 4 a.m. at least twice.
I've had people yell at me because they lose sleep because they can't put it down.
Well, you do, and the chapters they're not all short. I mean, you do give us these little break things, but yeah, it doesn't work because we're just like, it's not really the end of the chapter.
I try to end a chapter in a way that makes you want to keep going.
Yeah, you definitely did that. I couldn't put it down, but I really loved it. And, dealing with your choices, your repercussions, politics, how you speak to people, the hate and abuse of the faithless. There's just goes on and on, but it was just such a wonderful adventure to go on.
I really appreciate that, and I try hard to make sure that my books have something to say, and each book it definitely has sort of a foundational theme, and then a lot of other things that I sort of want to cover as well. But I don't think I get preachy. I think I let that sort of drive the story rather than than have to explain what those themes are.
Exactly. But I think a lot of readers will be really surprised that this series is your absolute first.
That's right. Yeah, and winning the Reader's Favorite Award for my debut novel, that was really shocking. I felt kind of the same way as when I got the cover quote for Child of Chaos from Piers Anthony, who was a childhood author hero of mine. I mean, some of the first fantasy and science fiction I read was from Piers Anthony, the Adept series, Split Infinity, and some of his early works were just amazing. And to have him give me this review, I mean, at first when I gave it to him, he said, "I'm not going to have time to read it." I'm like, "Okay, I understand." And then the next day, he told me he read it, couldn't put it down, and gave me this incredibly wonderful review. I mean, I could have chosen like 5 different quotes to put on the cover. It was amazing. So just that, and then the award just made me feel like, okay, maybe I'm doing something right.
Well, you're doing a lot right. I saw a lot of the reviews, and they were really surprised that it was so, like, it just packs a punch that you can't put down. You just like, I have to find out what happens next. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen to this girl, this boy,
Yeah, people do mention that there's a lot of twists that they don't see coming, but hopefully all makes sense.
No, it definitely all makes sense. So I can see how the video games must be an exciting thing. Do you still do the video games?
I do some freelancing here and there, but I'm mostly focused on the writing.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for such a great story that I enjoyed from beginning to end. I can't wait to see the rest of the series and hear the audiobook. Maybe I'll do that for book 3.
I invite you to. I will definitely be recording it. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. If you guys need a lot of action and some sleepless nights, Glen Dahlgren is definitely the author to check out. You will not be disappointed.